Still dealing with the introduction to investments, we now need to take a closer look at what is a company. This is dealt with in lesson 2 of the notes, and it's a very important issue leading up to our investments into the stock market. Let's assume that you are considering starting a business. You've looked at the scenario that I've painted about salaries and wages, and you feel that it's time for you to make a break from the world of employment and to start up a small business. Let's assume as well that the business that you want to start up is going to be a very small one-person concern. You're going to allocate a room in your house and you are going to make candles. Now, the candles that you're going to make will be all different colors and shapes and sizes, and you believe that if you buy a big block of wax and a couple of molds, that you can make a living out of selling candles to friends and to others that you come across. Now, at this stage of your entrepreneurial life, we are going to call you a sole trader. In other words, you are a one-person business. Now, what you must know as a sole trader is that you are taking the full risk of that business on your shoulders. You have got what is called unlimited liability. Very simply, what that means is that if the business should go bankrupt or insolvent, that means that you are liable to the creditors of your business, to the suppliers of the business to whom you owe money. You are liable to the full extent not only of what the business owns, but you're also liable to the extent of your personal assets. In other words, they can come and repossess your car, they can take away your house, they can take away anything that belongs to you personally in order to repay the debts of the business. So you're taking an enormous risk upon yourself under those circumstances. However, if the business succeeds, then of course the entire profit that you make as a result of having run that business very well is yours, and you obviously benefit financially from that. Now, let's assume that the business goes wonderfully well and that, as you expected, there is an enormous demand out there. People want to go back to eating at the dinner table and they're buying all kinds of candles. There have been specialty candles for Red Nose Day and candles for all kinds of special occasions, and the market is certainly there. To the point, in fact, that you are no longer coping with running this business on your own. So the next logical thing to do is for you to bring in a partner. Now, obviously, the minute you make this a two-person business, it can no longer be called a sole trader, and we'd have to change its form of ownership into what is known as a partnership. Now, a partnership can have anything between 2 and 20 partners, so there's obviously some scope for you to grow this business, and the partners themselves have not got rid of this problem of unlimited liability. In fact, the partners are now what we call jointly and severally liable, which means that the partners are liable together, jointly, and the partners are also liable as individuals if one or other partner cannot pay for his or her debts. Now, this is a really risky arrangement because if you are A and your partner is B, and your partner, because he or she is an owner of this business, can bind the partnership to a contract, and if that contract was a bad business decision, that can impact upon the business's success. And if the business goes bankrupt as a result of that, it's not person B who made the bad decision that will suffer, it's both partners who are owners of this business. And in fact, if person B or partner B is insolvent as an individual, then you, as the other partner, are fully responsible for the debts of that partnership. So you still have this overriding problem of being liable for the business to the extent of your personal assets. Your house is at risk, your car is at risk, and so on. However, things go wonderfully, wonderfully well. And the partnership grows and expands, and you get on very well with your partner to the point that you're now taking in additional partners. You're considering expanding outside of where you stay at the moment. You're looking at perhaps offering your product down in Natal, down in Cape Town, and you're now getting to the point where you're very, very concerned about the issue of unlimited liability. You feel that you're not prepared to take the risk of having your personal assets on the line. So you've heard about another alternative, which is called a closed corporation. And you believe that this form of ownership offers you some protection for the first time. And you believe that the protection that you're given is that the minute you start a closed corporation, you are starting a legal persona. In other words, this business, and let's call it Magic Candles, this business, Magic Candles, has a life of its own. It is recognized as an independent person in the eyes of the law, which means one very important thing, that here you are partner A, and there your partner is partner B. What you have done in running this business is you have contributed capital to the closed corporation. Let's assume that you've put in 10,000 Rand, and your partner has put in 5,000 Rand. That means that 15,000 Rand now belongs to the closed corporation called Magic Candles, which is one very important implication, is that if the business goes bankrupt, it's Magic Candles that goes bankrupt, not partner A or partner B. And therefore, the Magic Candles closed corporation can only pay what it has available. And if it only has 15,000 Rand to make good on its payments, then that's all it has. No one can come to you and say, it was your business, therefore you should be making up the deficit. You should be paying out of your own pocket for the insolvency. No one can say that because it's not you that's going insolvent, it's Magic Candles, and Magic Candles is a separate legal entity from yourself. Obviously, under circumstances of reckless trading, they can come back to you and they can ask you for an amount to make good on the debts of the company or on the closed corporation. However, under normal circumstances, you are protected, and we say that you have got what is called limited liability. You are only liable to the extent of your investment into that business. In other words, as partner A, you are only liable for the 10,000 Rand that you have invested into the closed corporation. Now, the closed corporation has one limitation, and that is that you can only have between 1 and 10 members. The minute you grow beyond 10 members, who are the owners of this business, then you can no longer be a closed corporation. And your candle business is going beautifully. In fact, you've got to the stage where you've now expanded and you've brought in additional members, additional owners, and these people have brought with them capital investment. The business is growing really well, and you've got to the limit of the 10 that you are allowed. So where do you go from here? Well, there is another step that you can take. You can change your form of ownership from a closed corporation into what is called a private company. Now, private companies, their names always end in PTY, which means proprietary. In other words, it's privately owned. And LTD, which reaffirms that the liability of the owners, who are now called shareholders, the liability of those owners is limited to the amount of capital that they've invested into the company. In other words, like under the closed corporation, your 10,000 Rand investment is all that you can lose. You are limited to losing that amount if the business goes bankrupt. Now, one advantage that the closed or the private company has over the closed corporation is that you can have a far bigger ownership. You can have anything between 1 and 50 shareholders. Please notice that the owners are now called shareholders. Moreover, one of the other considerations with a private company is that you cannot sell your shares to whoever you want to. There is no free transfer, or rather, let's say that the transfer of shares is restricted. What this means is that if you decide that you've had enough of candles, if you see another piece of wax, you're gonna collapse. You've decided to get out of the candle business. You may not simply go to your neighbor and say, would you like to buy my shares? You're not entitled to sell your shares to whoever you please. You must, in fact, consult first with the other shareholders. There is a restriction on who you can sell your shares to. And that's the nature of shares in a private company. But remember, the very important protection that you still have is that your liability is limited. If the business goes against you, all you can lose is the amount that you've invested into it. Let's assume that you are going great guns. This candle business is going nowhere but up. You've got to the point where you're looking further afield. You're looking into Southern Africa. You're looking, in fact, at exporting candles worldwide. You're putting the romance back into marriages. I mean, people are so cheerful about this candle business opportunity that's available. They're rallying to buy your candles. And you now got to the point where you are wanting to raise additional capital to grow the business into a worldwide player. Of course, a private company has the restraint that it's a maximum of 50 shareholders, and you would like to attract many, many more than that. You'd like to bring more shareholders into the business along with their capital in order to make it a really big concern. Now, you can go to the bank if you want to and ask to borrow money from them, but there's another smarter option. That is, you can now go from being a private company and you can make application to becoming a public company. And there are some very significant differences that have now taken place. The public company's name simply ends in LTD. The PTY, the private part, falls away, and the company is now a limited company, which reminds you and reminds any shareholder who wants to buy into this company that their liability is limited to the amount that they've invested. They cannot put their personal assets, or they will not put their personal assets at risk when they buy shares in a public company. There's another very important aspect that's taken place, is that a public company can now have anything between 7 and an infinitely large number of shareholders. There is no restriction. That symbol means infinity. There's no restriction on how many shareholders you have in your company. You can have millions if you so wish. And there's another important consideration, and that is that the shares in a public company are freely transferred. In other words, there is no restriction on who you sell your shares to. In the case of the private company, remember, you couldn't sell your shares to whoever you pleased. But in the case of the public company, you have the right to sell your shares to any willing buyer. Now, this, of course, means that at any time you wish to sell out shares that you hold in Magic Candles, you can do so as long as there is another investor out there who's prepared to pay the price that you're asking. Now, folks, this is the basis of the stock market. The public company forms the basis upon which the Johannesburg Stock Exchange operates. Let's have a look a little bit further and see how this works out. Public companies may apply to the Johannesburg Stock Exchange for what is called a listing. And we would refer to those companies that obtain this listing, we would refer to them as listed public companies. And you will see them when you open up the prices page of the newspaper and you look down all the names, you will know that all of those are companies whose shares are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. Now, why? What is the reason for that? Why do public companies go to this place called the Johannesburg Stock Exchange? Well, you can imagine that if the shares that I hold in the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, in a particular company, if those shares in Magic Candles are not listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and I want to sell them, how do I go about that? Well, I can go along to the local newspaper and I can put an advert into the classified section saying shares available. The only problem is that the people that are looking at that newspaper are probably unlikely to respond because they've got no idea about what the shares are and what they're worth. So it's a very difficult thing to sell shares in an environment in which there's nowhere to go to sell them. Now, the Johannesburg Stock Exchange provides simply a marketplace. It's a place that I know that if I hold shares in a public company and they listed public company shares, I know that I can go there and I will find lots of buyers and lots of sellers of shares. In other words, I will find a marketplace. And that's all that a stock exchange is. It's a place to go when you want to buy or to sell shares. Now, we must remember that there are many public companies that are not listed. These are, for example, public companies that do not want a listing. They don't want their shares to be listed or quoted on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. There may be another category of those public companies that would like a listing, but they do not qualify. It's not automatic that if you are a public company that you automatically will become listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange if you should so wish. In fact, you have to make application, and a committee, a listings committee, will sit down and will decide whether you satisfy the criteria. And that means a very important thing to us. It means that those companies that are listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange have some track record, and they have some showing of profits, so that the investor is not putting their money into a company that is not qualified by virtue of that listings decision. And there's a third category of companies that are not listed, and we may consider that some of these, and this is a very small portion of public companies, some of these may be attempts to defraud the public. Be very wary about buying shares in companies that are not listed on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange. And let's look at why. These are questionable companies that may in fact have ulterior motives. Let's look at why it's so important to invest on shares that are listed. The reason for it, and let's take for example a company such as Pick n Pay. A couple of decades ago, Pick n Pay will have come to the markets and they will have wanted to list their company on the stock exchange. Now, we must remember that the minute Pick n Pay is a listed public company, that the people in the public are invited by means of what is called a prospectus. It's an invitation. Come along to the party or come along and buy some shares in Pick n Pay. That people in the public are invited to buy shares. Notice I said people in the public. Anybody who has the money available to invest into that company is entitled to do so. It's a public company and nobody is barred from that investment. Now, the people who take up or who apply for the option to invest in Pick n Pay are called investors in what is known as the primary market. They are buying shares directly from Pick n Pay. And the money they invest is going into broadening the scope and the prospect that Pick n Pay has for expanding their business. They are providing fresh capital, if you like, into that company. Now, given that a public company is such that you can sell your shares whenever you want to, these individuals who bought their shares directly from the company are entitled to sell those shares at any time. Now, that's where the Johannesburg Stock Exchange is so important, because I know that as a holder of these listed shares, that I can go along and I can sell those shares tomorrow if there is a willing buyer. That is a very important comfort. I mean, who would buy a new motor car if you knew that there was no resale? If you knew that you could never sell that car, would you buy a new car? You wouldn't. You would only buy that commodity if you knew that there was somewhere to go in order to sell it and in order to take advantage of a positive or a favorable price. So whenever any of these original investors in the primary market sell their shares, they will go through the Johannesburg Stock Exchange, and we say that they are selling their shares in the secondary market. And that, at the end of the day, is the function of the JSE. It provides investors with somewhere to go, a marketplace, people who understand shares and investments, to go to them and to say, I want to buy shares or I want to sell shares. And the shares that are sold on the Johannesburg Stock Exchange are therefore sold on what is known as the secondary market.